You know what? You're right. It was only a quarterfinal match, but Canada did make it through. I'm still
Yes.
looking forward to a U.S.-Canada final.
I'm sorry. I want you to look forward to it. I really want you to look forward to it. And that's what I thought. I think everybody's looking forward to it.
Yes, well,
that potential.
And that is the reason for this segment of the show. Welcome to Wait What? Sportsbiz Chat with DP and McGhee, the podcast where we take a sometimes irreverent, a sometimes cynical, and yes, even a sometimes serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, 𝘕𝗵𝗫𝗍.
And I'm David 𝗵𝗏𝗏.
David, we've got a great guest today, but before we get to him, what is on your mind?
I feel like there's so many things that we still need to do reviews on. We have the Winter Olympic Games that are doing, from every stat I can see, viewership-wise in the U.S., doing extremely well. Obviously heading to some big showdowns. 𝘋𝘰𝘨𝑚 just won her final race earlier today. We're recording this on a Wednesday afternoon. Need to set that. Obviously, the NBA All-Star Game with the new format was this past weekend, a very dramatic Daytona 500 with Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin's 23-11. With past guest Steve 𝘰𝘁𝘁 as president winning in a just very, very dramatic fashion. So just some interesting things to talk about. I guess I'll start with the Winter Games. From everything I'm seeing, NBC Universal doing extremely well with about a 26 million daily across the various platforms in terms of U.S. viewership, record-setting streaming, not surprising there, but as more attention goes to that type of format, more people understand how to visit with it, engage with that. So I think that's very encouraging. I also have to say, not that there haven't been some kinks, but the production value and the stuff we're seeing in the sliding sports.
Yeah, the use of the drone. The use of that drone is that's like it's the new curling. Everybody is big on the drone. And by the way, how many curling matches do these guys play? It is on every day. In every window, morning, afternoon, evening, you can find. It's like it's like the curlers heard that they were popular, and now it's gone to their head.
And now they're playing it and they're trash talking. I mean, the fact that a Canadian team is trash talking now, hockey, you'd expect that to. Yeah, they kind of cheated, and he got caught.
They didn't kind of cheat. They cheat. His finger was on the stone.
His finger was definitely on it. His finger was definitely on it.
And listen to us like we're experts in the rules.
Experts on curling.
Yeah.
The drone in the sliding sports and the drone on the skiing, all the skiing events has been so amazing. I think when they add the drone to the curling and it would just slowly hover over the stone as it makes its way down. But yeah, that competition has been unbelievable. We're curling experts.
We're like the Gene Steratore of curling now.
Right.
Oh no, his finger was on the stone past the green line.
But the fact that he so aggressively got in the face when the guy called him out on it, it's going to be interesting how that plays out.
Two of the nicest countries on earth, Sweden and Canada. I would venture a guess that the Canadian curler is either born in the U.S. or spent a significant amount of time.
Or was a hockey player.
Because his comeback was, no, not F me, F you, right? Basically.
Yeah, he went aggressive in his response.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk because I really want to get your view on this because it does speak to the Olympic ideal. And I'm hoping we get a chance to talk to our guest about this as well, meaning the Olympic ideal. But 𝘃𝘁 Coventry had a very big decision to make, and that was with a Ukrainian skeleton racer, slider, 𝘓𝘂𝗍𝘂 𝘍𝘳𝘂𝗍𝘂, I believe the name is pronounced, who wanted to wear a memorial helmet that honored fallen Ukrainian soldiers in it. And to a person outside of, I guess, Russia, people thought this was a great thing to honor his fellow countrymen. And the original decision was to ban him from the game, saying he could not wear it in competition. They ended up softening, saying that he could stay at the games, but he couldn't compete with that helmet. They gave him a chance. Bring the helmet to the race, bring it to the facility. You can show it off, you can talk about it, but you can't wear it in the competition. I will give you my view before I put you on the spot on that. I feel she made the decision she had to make. as much as I know a lot of people are against it, and I don't think that's a popular decision, because how can you not let him wear the helmet of his choice, especially in sports where we see people wear whatever equipment they have. But there is a no message rule. And I'm not saying it's an advertisement or anything like that, but that was a message. And I hate saying that in a way, but I feel like that was the decision she had to make. So I wanted to get your perspective on it.
If it gives you any comfort, I agree with you 100%.
Right.
There is a no political message rule within the Olympics. The only argument I think he could have made was it's not a political message, it's a human rights or humanity message. But they did give him an off-ramp. He chose not to take it.
Mm-hmm.
I commend that bravery. I also commend the way that 𝘰𝘰𝘨𝗏𝗏 handled it, because in the past, that would have been handled by commission. It would have become a moot point because they wouldn't have ruled on it until after, they would have banned him until they could. And then, most importantly, she went and spoke to this person.
Exactly.
Face to face. She took that. That is true leadership. And I do agree with you. It's unfortunate. You watched a lot of the sliding sports, as did I. There were opportunities at both the start box and the finish line where that could have been shown off. I don't think this young man was favored for a medal, but he gave up an Olympic dream to stay true to his principles, and I think that should be commended. But I feel bad for him, but I don't think 𝘰𝘰𝘨𝗏𝗏 had any other choice she could have made.
Pop it over to you. What's big on your list?
Well, a couple things. NBA All-Star Game. A tale of two events, if you will, right? The games on Sunday were more competitive, with the exception of the last game, where the OGs sort of just phoned it in. But Wemby came out before the games and showed it during the games that he was going to try.
Wemby was balling.
He was going to try, and I think everybody came to that. But the Saturday event has got to be blown up. Quote Charles Barkley, it's terrible. It's just terrible. But ratings up 88%, 8.8 million people watching. Now, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it was sandwiched between the Olympics. And we talked about the Olympic viewership up 93% over the first 5 days. So there's that. There's the fact that it was in a good window, a Saturday or Sunday afternoon in the middle of February. Third, it was on a network for the first time in many, many years, right? It was on NBC, the main network. And then fourth, we've talked about this many times in the past, the new methodology that Nielsen uses. So I think there's a lot of good that's there. We'll see what happens next year when it doesn't have the Olympic halo around it.
Or this first year of a new format. So it got some buzz around that, which I thought was exciting. And clearly there are enough good international players to make that work. It was funny because in Adam Silver's presentation at the end, he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, but thank you for trying. We appreciate how hard you played, because that was such an issue. It was an embarrassment, of course, last year when he stood on that court to present the trophies, and it was just clear that nobody had given the effort. So I think it was fun. It was fun basketball to watch.
Did you happen to watch the game where Kawhi Leonard went off? The second game?
I did not watch that one. I was kind of bouncing back and forth.
He went off. I don't know how he had something like 75 or 80% of his team's points. I don't want to quote a number because I forget it at this point, but all I was thinking as I was watching it was Adam Silver does not want to hand this guy an MVP trophy.
And there hasn't been that much news about that. And I wasn't on the inside, obviously, of the press conferences, but of course Tim is referring to, the issue with the investigation going on of the Clippers and the potential circumvention of salary cap issues with Kawhi's contract. I'm being very diplomatic, aren't I?
Yeah.
Now, what was talked about a lot was tanking. And that seemed to be the focus of what Adam Silver says we have to do, because there's, we're pre-All-Star break and their team's tanking pretty much. And that seems a little ridiculous, trying to get draft picks. So that's a huge concern for him. And he knows that affects people, the way people talk about the league, the way people talk about the regular season just being shit, and that nobody's trying and there's no reason to watch a game until the last 2 minutes. And those things are all exacerbated by those type of issues. So now what moves is he going to make? on that? I don't know, but he knows he needs to make some, and he's committed to being strong on that.
I don't know what else you can do other than just find the hell out of those guys, because they've already changed the draft methodology, so you're not guaranteed the best pick if you have the worst record.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah. The All-Star game is always a big weekend. It's when they do all their big press stuff, Tech Summit, et cetera, and the stars are out, and we know the NBA is a big draw for the star. One star that wasn't there, Michael Jordan, who also is supposed to be a special contributor for NBC because he had more important things to do in Daytona, and that's win himself a Daytona 500 and for 23XI team, which, as I said when I first started, was a very dramatic, exciting race. We have not seen, the NBA has posted some preliminary numbers, and I don't know if big data is working on behalf of the NBA better than they're working on behalf of NASCAR, but I checked right before we started recording, and they haven't been released. I know the preliminary races and qualifying, I think, were down.
Yeah.
But they had a hell of a race. There was a crash that happened with, I think, a couple to go. They could have thrown a caution flag. They didn't. They let them race it out, and it was just – and then there was, of course – the crash right before the finish, and Tyler Reddick from 23XI went on to win it with his Chumba Casino sponsorship going across the line.
Mm-hmm.
And it was absolutely fascinating to have MJ in victory lane and Jim France from NASCAR, after what they went through last year, shake his hand. I mean, you talk about NASCAR having a great moment.
Yeah, I think it's a nice sort of segue from the acrimony and adversarial nature of that lawsuit to Michael Jordan maybe being that next generation of celebrity. I mean, he's a celebrity, right? He's by far the biggest celebrity who's ever owned a NASCAR team, but he doesn't go to every race. He hasn't been, you've been to NASCAR races. You go to NASCAR races, you see Richard Childress there. You see Joe Gibbs. You see Rick Hendrick, right? You see Chip Ganassi. You don't always see Michael Jordan there. Denny Hamlin's at every race because he's still racing for Joe Gibbs, right? So do you start to see Michael more at the track and speak up more on the business issues of NASCAR as it relates to his position as an owner? That'll be interesting to see.
When we had Adam Stern on to talk about these things, and that photo that they took after the settlement, and that they all came together and they all kind of had their lines and they say it. And Michael was being interviewed in pre-race, and he was on it. I mean, he was on point in terms of what this means moving forward. And Michael never gives you that much when he talks, by the way, as we all know from seeing him. He's got a chip on his shoulder, that's pretty massive in general, but he is playing owner role like great, and that's behind him, and they're moving forward together. And to have this win, which I would imagine infuses even more excitement into that team and him as an owner, it's really a remarkable moment. And I'm more curious as to how this will affect the next few races from a viewership standpoint, interest, sponsorship, and so forth.
Yeah, NASCAR got lucky with the weather, because that's what has hurt them, I think, in my estimation, in the last few years. When you have races that are either delayed for a long period of time or even postponed until the next day, not only does it hurt ratings, obviously, it also hurts the momentum that you're hopefully start building with the Great American Race. Just to go back to Michael for 1 second, I would venture a guess that he's probably been interviewed by the media more times than every other owner combined.
Right.
Over the course of his 40-year plus career as a basketball star, going back to his days at UNC.
I don't want to spend that much time on this, but I do think, because we didn't get to do it last week, is we need to do a quick recap on viewership numbers for Super Bowl. Obviously, from a score standpoint, no one expected the score to be as big of a blowout, which I think it was. A very unexciting game, 29-13 Seahawks.
I think what did I have, 35, 28?
I had 24-21, so if I was probably a little closer.
Could you imagine if Seattle was more effective in the red zone? That kid from Marist.
Yeah, right.
Do you know who was the first career scoring leader in Marist College lacrosse history?
No.
My brother.
Oh,
My brother. Yeah,
Wow.
they started the program when he was
There
a
you go.
freshman or sophomore. He held the record for many, many years. My brother went to Marist. He likes to joke that he went to the only Division I school that was named after a dead comedian. They are the Red Foxes.
Basically 125 million, which I was way off. I said it was going to be some insane number, 131.5 million. You had it at like 120.
No, I think I had 130.
Yeah, but you were closer. But it was, was it the game? It might have been the game. It could have been some people just absolutely refusing, as we talked about last week. The halftime show still did very, very well, but it was a boring game. And
Yeah.
it probably did get some tune out. That might not have helped. But it's not, I mean, it's not like it's doing poor numbers. I don't think they're making any make goods on
It
this.
it wasn't a great matchup. It wasn't, you had to, despite the fact that New England hadn't been there in several years, I think there is a contingent of people who don't particularly care for the Patriots, even though this is sort of a new regime with coaches and players. It wasn't an exciting game. Did we lose some people because of the alternative program? Yeah, I'm sure we did. But Bad Bunny was 128.2.
Second
fairly
most.
Yeah, behind Kendrick Lamar. And I was telling a friend of mine, he happens to be a Mexican American, but not Puerto Rican. But I said, I learned more about the Puerto Rican experience in 13 minutes than I have in my entire life up until that point. And I say this not because I don't appreciate him singing in Spanish. I would have gotten even more out of it had they put subtitles for his songs. But I don't know if his songs were necessarily directly related to what happened in the performance.
I think he had songs that he was going to do, and he had a show choreographed of the experience he wanted to show. And so I think that were they related in their celebratory nature, maybe, but I think they worked together musically. But he was, there was a message in what he wanted the scene to be, and that's what was created on his behalf. By the way, it was the most watched event in NBC Universal history. So think about that. So it's a Super Bowl. We're getting a little crazy when it comes to these numbers.
And I will say one thing. I want to call out something very insightful that you said to me, not on the air, was that the performance was almost choreographed into short snippets that would lend themselves very well to social media, TikTok and Instagram in particular. But I thought that was a great option.
Yeah, and I think that is where the NFL is seeing other sports. F1 is particularly good at that, and that's a growth area, especially with younger audiences. So apparently the engagement with his close, where he mentioned all the countries and had the only thing stronger than hate is love sign behind him, was just like massive numbers. And it was with NFL and Bad Bunny's audiences all combined together to go around the world, and it was pretty massive. One of the fascinating things that I just saw was the gambling that went on with it, and the traditional like legal sports book stuff, the stuff that is regulated via states, the DraftKings, the FanDuels, etc., had a 1.71 to 1.76 billion handle. The prediction markets had basically the same amount, and these things are the new players. Like, people are just learning this, and this is how easy, and it's not regulated at the state level. And of course, things like what's the first song Bad Bunny is going to, play are kind of in this mix. But I find that remarkable, and this is 𝘕𝗫𝗨𝗏 and probably a few others. But
there was a bit of a scandal is probably too strong of a word, but there was an issue that came up in both 𝘕𝗨𝗏 and Polymarket. Did Cardi B perform? Now, she was out there, but did she meet the definition of a performance, and would they pay off on that bet? I think Polymarket wound up paying off on the bet. 𝘕𝗨𝗏 did not. I have a friend who ran a hedge fund for many years, and he's still a very successful investor. And he said, when you're playing the prediction markets, you're competing against insiders, which is never a good competition to have because they have more, better, and different information.
Yeah, it's 𝘕𝗨𝗏's volume on that day increased 2,700%
right
over 2025. It's just unbelievable. Another thing that we're going to have to talk about, Giannis Antetokounmpo was having this weird year, right?
Wait,
like
what?
People are, yeah. I did pretty well on that. See, I've been studying,
you did
on that. But he's now a spokesperson for 𝘊𝘰𝘨. Am I just an absolute like gambling teetotaler? I find that ridiculous. I mean, great, they want to pay him money to be a spokesperson, but he's constantly talking about betting, and maybe he's just a spokesperson. I mean, Pete Rose got like shafted so bad he could have been a spokesperson the whole time and made just as much money as he did gambling, which he probably lost money.
Right.
Anyway. All right. I'll get off my high horse on that one. I think we should probably, before we take a break, maybe we need to talk quickly about what's going on in MLBPA.
Yeah, big news. Tony Clark stepping down as they prepare for the negotiations. Yeah, you always question when somebody steps down at this particular juncture in a cycle with negotiations. Yeah, I mean, no, I'm saying when the announcement came out.
Yeah, right. Yes, that didn't take that long to kind of come around. But you're right. I mean, just brutal timing for the Players Association, and now they've got to decide: are they going to put in Bruce Meyer? We had the NFLPA situation a year ago, less than a year ago, I guess, and this is pretty major. Now, I don't know if Rob Manfred and the MLB are sitting there kind of licking their chops now, like they're such a it's somewhat dysfunctional over there, but it's just bad timing. I feel bad for the players. It's just it's a horrible look. And this is on top of some other thing that Tony Clark has been starting to get accused in, that people are looking into, some of this investment in this youth sports league where it doesn't look like much was going on, but it was using association money. There's going to be a lot of things being looked at into Tony Clark's tenure now.
All right, what do you say, partner? Take a break?
Let's do it.
Welcome in our guest. Okay, we'll be back in a second.
It's time for our guest.
We are back, and we are very pleased to welcome our next guest. Doug Logan was born in the great state of New Jersey. He studied civil engineering at Manhattan College. He served in the military during the Vietnam War, where he won 2 Bronze Stars. He was part of the 101st Airborne Division, one of the most storied and famous divisions in the U.S. military. We're bringing him on for his long and storied career in the sports industry. Doug was the first ever commissioner of Major League Soccer. He was also CEO of USA Track and Field. He helped start the National Rugby League and has done so many more things that we could take up an entire episode just talking about Doug's accomplishments. Doug, welcome to the show.
Nice to be with both of you.
So let's get started. When you took the role as the first commissioner of Major League Soccer, what were your priorities and goals at that time? And we're going back to the mid-90s at this point.
Yeah, it was, I took the job Thanksgiving week of 95, and within a 10 or 12 week period of time, we had to be ready to do business and to play games in 10 cities from coast to coast. So I was hired late into the process. I inherited a very able staff and an organizational structure that I thought would work. But I went to work and I took my first my first day off in July of 96. I worked 7 days a week. It was one thing after another. Startups are fascinating in that you better bring your A game 7 days a week. You'd better have plenty of energy. You'd better be extraordinarily flexible, and you better have a sense of humor. One of the greatest books written about startups is a book called Loose Balls, which is a book written about the ABA, and it's hilarious. It was like every week was something new. So I'll go back and I'll answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, at that point in time, while I and the others who were responsible for this enterprise and for launching professional soccer back in the country had some long range goals and a vision of what it could be, The here and now was survival. The here and now was make sure that you're able. I used to say that my mantra was by doing everything today to make sure that we can play next season. And it was that short of a time frame. It was establishing a brand to a large degree. We were out there in the marketplace trying to sell what I used to call smoke. We weren't selling fire. We couldn't prove to anybody what it was that we were selling. Still, we managed to raise about $125 million in sponsorship and media money. We were able to capitalize a little bit on the energy from World Cup from '94, although World Cup and league play, and I can talk about it infinitum. Those two things are really two very different things. And I worked as hard as I ever worked in my life those 4 years that I was there. And it was a great opportunity. And some of the fruits we're seeing today, people ask me, did you ever envision that it could be this? And my simple answer is yes. I mean, this was the vision that we had. Took a little longer, was a little more expensive to get there, but I'm really not shocked at the scale and the magnitude of the success that my successors have been able to take this project to.
You brought this up to kind of the present day, and we appreciate that. Before I do ask this question, and just wanted to follow up on Tim's introduction and say thank you very much for your
You're
service.
very welcome.
MLS announced recently, and it was big news in the sports biz, that they're going to align with the international calendar. Was there ever any consideration back in the early days, the beginning of the league, to start there, or was it always looked at, let's be off of that calendar?
Well, reality becomes a byproduct of necessity. And if we were going to play in large stadiums and hopefully attract episodically large crowds, we needed to be in these venues that could accommodate our sport in the major markets. And at that time, we were playing in, we were a second or third tenant in large football stadiums. And as a consequence, going to a winter calendar was just not feasible. I mean, we could not get dates in places to play. And so it was, you reverse engineer that, and we had to play in the summer, and we had to be a summer league. On top of that, trying to establish a footprint with regard to distribution, and particularly television distribution, would have put us on weekends head to head with gorillas, and we would much rather compete with baseball than with the NFL, for example, for that media space, so to speak. So we knew that for an appreciable period of time, until we got the stadium projects going in each individual city, these made for soccer stadiums that we always had in the blueprints, and we knew we had to get there. But for that period of time that we had to play in places like Arrowhead Stadium and in the Rose Bowl and Giant Stadium, we knew that we couldn't be a winter league. Everyone knew that ultimately we were going to have to change that calendar. Right now, I think it's the appropriate time to do it. Don Garber and his and the league have got a footprint that is large enough to be able to do the kinds of stuff scheduling wise to accommodate weather. They have enough Sunbelt teams. They have enough teams in relatively temperate climates that they can do certain machinations with regard to the schedule to accommodate it. And now, the hue and cry for the last 5 or 6 years is alignment for the sake of the transfer window, alignment for the sake of national team dates and everything else. And now it is the appropriate time to do it.
Yeah, that's everything that the league has said, and it's great to see. Let's go back to the World Cup, not the '94 World Cup, but the topic of the World Cup in general. It's coming back to North America this summer. The last time the Men's World Cup was here, MLS was, you could draw a straight line between the '94 World Cup and the launch of the league. I know there were two different properties, as you said earlier, but what do you think the sports industry in general and the soccer business in particular can expect to come out of this World Cup coming back to North America this summer?
I think a bump, and not too much more. You can't make too much of it. First of all, they're two separate business models. The World Cup is fundamentally a one-off that occurs every 4 years. League play requires a tribal following to what Seinfeld used to say in one of his funnier bits, rooting for the shirt. You need people out there who root for the shirt. I, I became a believer kind of backwards. We had 94. MLS to a large degree is son of World Cup 94 because it was a contractual requirement that was imposed upon the federation in order to get World Cup in 94. And we got a good bump and we were able to sign some interesting players that had played in the World Cup so that there was that transition. And in the first year, a good part of our success came as a consequence. People who were sampling, they were tasting, if we go to this, will we have the same feelings as World Cup? Well, the reality is you wouldn't. It's a very, very different idiom. But then we got to World Cup 98 and I went for about a month to France and we were horrible. We stunk up the joint. It was one of our worst World Cup performances ever. And I was really worried that it would really do harm to our business. So worried that I had my family over there. I left my family behind in France and I came back to see and to try to hold the ship together for this, the consequences of our, 3-match performance over there. It didn't impact anything. Attendance did not go down. Television ratings did not go down. Inside of a week, I got back on a plane and I went back for the semifinals and finals. So there will be a bump. There will be some new consumers that will be incented for about a year. You'll feel it. The properties, the commercial aspect, the merchandisers will see a bump. It'll be a good thing. But at the end of the day, it isn't we live in a country right now where everyone presumes that their great idea is transformational, and it will not be transformational because there's no such thing in sports anymore or ever. I mean, the 40 years 40 years after its founding, the NBA was still taking people to games in buses. I mean, and you were playing in places like Syracuse and Fort Wayne, and so it's evolutionary. It takes a while for it to become a permanent place in the smorgasbord table of the sporting life of a country. I think with soccer, we've been able to do that. We are there at the table. We're there. We're there at the scale that we should be at the present time. So if you want to define that as success, which I do, it's been successful.
Yeah, before I give it back to David, I was just looking some of those players that you mentioned who came out of the World Cup, some of the early stars of MLS. You had guys like 𝘱𝘕 and Tab Ramos, who's a Kearney, New Jersey kid, and Tony Miola, another Kearney, New Jersey kid. But you also had international stars who came here. Valderrama came from Colombia. Hugo Sanchez, Marco Echeverri, who was my first favorite player. Yeah, there was some great players right out of the gate who were playing in MLS.
Very, very good players, and the grouping of international players that we put together were really terrific and did a lot for us, and it educated a part of the population. There's always been this frisson, this tension between European soccer and South American soccer. One is, in the old days, long ball, very a lot of the play was kind of a shocking kind of a play. The and the people in Europe would see the South American play as lackadaisical and more like, I used to describe it as, you want to see soccer in Europe, that's prose. If you want to see poetry, go to South America. And so we would get, we got a player like Carlos Valderrama, who is a wonderful man, and thrilled to be in this country, probably principally for the safety of his family. And that's another long story. But I mean, to be able to live in Florida and feel safe and not feel like he's going to be kidnapped, when he goes to a restaurant. I mean, he got those good feelings. Well, we had a new team in Miami, and he got reassigned to the Miami team, who had a very Anglo-oriented coach who hated the fact that Carlos would stand there in the middle of the field and not chase balls and not do all the things that you're supposed to do in England. And Carlos, of course, would sit there and he'd be like Gretzky. He'd go to where the ball was going to go rather than, Gretzky's magic was he always knew where the puck was going, and that's where he positioned himself. Well, Valderrama was much like Gretzky, and then these pinpoint passes that he would make, and he was a magician. Well, his coach didn't like him very much, so he sat him. I had to come to Jesus discussion with him and with his owner and everything else. Those are the kinds of early day trying to meld, individual ideas of what the sport was versus modern day realities. And of course, the Premier League imports players like mad from Latin America these days, and now it's not the old kind of Man U, get the ball down at the end, and then ultimately we'll score a goal. So
I was going to say, you could have been describing a player who's in Miami right now when you were talking about pinpoint passes and going to where the ball is going to be.
I should add that one of the most popular expressions on the Wait What Sportsbiz Chat show, Doug, is that Tim does like quoting Gretzky and talking about what you just said. So it's an important piece of our podcast.
I have a unique piece of memorabilia. I don't get signed shirts, and I don't have a whole lot of photographs with players or anything else. But every once in a while, I'll find something unique that I've got that nobody else has got. I got one of Usain Bolt's shoes when he broke a record, and he wrote something cute on it. I mean, I took Wayne Gretzky to his first Super Bowl.
Wow.
And so I have a Super Bowl ticket with Wayne Gretzky's autograph on the back. So, go figure that.
You can tell by looking behind me, I'm a bit of a collector, and I've got ticket envy right now, Doug.
I have a feeling that Gretzky maybe should have called Doug before he appeared at the draw to learn how to pronounce a few country names, but we won't go there right now. But you mentioned Usain Bolt, maybe the greatest track and field star of all time.
Who wasn't an American.
Who wasn't an American. So I'm going to tie this back.
I am.
Yeah. Well,
despite some of the things I've said on the past on the show, I can be jingoistic.
Yeah, no, that's fine because
especially during an Olympic Games.
That's what I wanted to talk about because despite all these great stars that we just talked about playing in MLS, MLS and US hadn't necessarily gotten its due, and still hasn't, and maybe still isn't there on the world stage in terms of its competitiveness in the sport. But you went to USA Track and Field, where USA has been, if not dominant, certainly a powerhouse for generations and consistently is. And again, I say that on the soccer side relative to the men's side of this, because the women obviously have been pretty dominant. What was the appeal on that role to you at that time of your life?
Well, first of all, be consider. I from time to time when I've got my head on right, I like to look at not only what I'm doing day to day, but what I'm doing in general, and try and get some altitude from it. Look at it from a 30,000 feet and not worry about not necessarily look at the details to it. To be considered um, as a potential competent steward of a second major sport was an honor that I could not refuse. There was a certain point in time in my life, somebody came up to me and he said, "Well, what's your dream job?" And I said, "Well, I really don't have one except," and this was back when I was in the facilities business. I got to tell you that if somebody came to me with the keys to Madison Square Garden, I couldn't turn them down. I just couldn't turn them down, where I used to go to prize fights and I used to go to basketball games. I just couldn't turn that down. So on the one level, the honor of being able to be that steward, and I say steward because all we are is custodians, and hopefully we leave the asset in better shape than we found it. And then that's not being immodest. That's, you try and take an asset and make it better and then pass it on to somebody else. I also was prodded pretty heavily by a guy who has been a quasi mentor to me, Peter Uberoth, who I think the world of, and who at the time was heading up the U.S. Olympic Committee. And he said to me, "Look, we've got a problem there. We've got a drug problem. We've got a minor corruption problem there. We've got and the more I dug into it, I realized that at that point in time, we were really operating and functioning on our laurels. So we were sitting back and saying, okay, we've got probably the from a standpoint of the pool of athletes that we've got in this country because of a wide variety of reasons. Nutrition, early training, good coaching, what have you. We've got this pool and to a degree, we were mailing it in. We were just sitting back and letting them go run. And true competition, to me, to achieve excellence, required something more than that. So it became a challenge. I had a bunch of stuff that I needed to clean up. When I went in there, largely from a governance standpoint. I mean, I was hired by a board of 34 people, none of whom I met personally ahead of time. It was a Zoom call like this. And
Wow.
I gave them some ideas, and then I got off the Zoom call, and then I got a call later on, "You're it," but it was encouraged by the U.S. Olympic Committee. And I had, there was a heavy lift involved there. I happen to love the sport. I mean, I've been following it all my life, and like I tell people, I was always that bad athlete that was, they brought him along to enter events to get points, to get the 1 point to be the entry, and it had nothing to do with how fast or, and then I wrote sports for the Manhattan College newspaper, and I went and track was my beat. And this was in the days of George Eastman and Jumbo Elliott in Villanova, and I learned how to shoot craps in the hallways of the Armory, in Washington Heights. I mean, I was a part of that kind of fabric, and I had that in my blood. So it was great fun. Had a great ride. You go back to Bolt. I'll just tell a very short story. I went to a meeting. The International Federation for Track was based in Monte Carlo, of course, and there were a series of meetings there, and they were lauding Bolt. And afterwards, I flew back to Paris on a plane with him and sat next to him for an entire plane ride. And his little brother, by the way. Okay. And his little brother came along for the ride because he got all the swag, right? anything that Bolt didn't want, or Bolt would be given, a jacket or a shirt or whatever. Maybe one for my brother too. So the little brother came along, got all the swag. went to all the clubs. Oh no, he's my brother, and had a wonderful time. Never had to run. Okay, so I spent a wonderful 45 minutes with this precocious. So I think he was 21 at the time or 20 or something. Precocious, talented young man with just this glint in his eye, and he kept on asking me all these questions about where he should take his career or what he should do, and some on track and some off track, and actually I was able to get him to come and compete in the Penn Relays right after that plane ride. And so and you guys are well aware of the Jamaican population in Philadelphia that is kind of this little well kept secret, and it was a magical meet when he came up there. So
Yeah, I got to imagine Franklin Field was sold out for that year.
oh yeah.
So, you mentioned Peter Ueberroth. You mentioned the Olympics. You were leading USA track and field during the 2008, Beijing Olympics. A
Correct.
pretty consequential time. Given that we're in the middle of games right now, what are your thoughts on the Olympic movement? Are you bullish on the future of the Olympic movement?
It is both of these things exist. Okay, it is from the standpoint of altruism, from the standpoint of the best in sport. Okay, and that is bring your best and have them compete against the best. It is just the ideal, the Olympic ideal, is something that is still, and fosters in me a good feeling and a fondness. It is also one of the most corrupt enterprises on the face of the earth, and that's because there's a tradition of a lot of suits, okay, guys wearing suits that are affiliated, controlled, and on an international basis do a lot of very bad things. I spent a long career. I mean, I've done business with convicted felons. I've done business with guys that I wouldn't invite to my home. I've done business with a lot of very, very sordid people. I have never had a guy in a hotel room in Beirut, Lebanon, look me in the eye and say to me, I can deliver 50 votes for Chicago for $8 million. And my response, quite simply, was, we don't do that shit. We don't do that, and that probably was the tipping point of the Olympics coming to Chicago or not. It was $8 million and 50 votes, and someone in Brazil said yes, and in Chicago we said no. So it is both of those things at the same time. And if both of those can sit in your head without it exploding, that's what the Olympics is all about.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, Chicago was knocked out in the first round of voting that time.
First one out. It was I was in Chicago at the time, and it was a big deal. I was actually working with some corporations that were starting to think through the thinking, and the bid was solid. I mean, the bid was solid. Mayor Daley did an incredible job pulling that together.
I think President Obama.
Yeah.
And Ryan.
Yep. Correct.
As the chair was superb. So I was sitting in that room. Ryan was in the room next to me when I said what I said, and I went back and I told him, and he went, we can't do that.
So many things that you've touched. You also helped launch the National Rugby League. We're curious, as you think about sports like that, as you look ahead or see anything now that you're somewhat bullish on as an upstart sport or some new property that you think has the makings of something that could be big?
There's some fringe areas which may have some legs. And what comes to mind is cricket. Right now, the Cricket World Cup is going on. There is a selectively global love for that sport that could compete. It won't find breathing space in this country with baseball. It just won't. We have a lot on our plate domestically. We have a wide variety of places to go to. I often thought that it was a shame that a great sport like lacrosse didn't get purchased.
Mhm.
You know, it didn't grab it. And then I realized how regional it is, you know. But it's a wonderful, wonderful sport.
Tim, did you tell
I
him to say
remember.
that?
I remember.
Okay.
I remember watching Jim Brown play. I mean,
Wow.
you know,
Wow.
and he was probably a better lacrosse player for Syracuse than he was a football player.
That's what
I mean, you
everybody
know,
says.
so, oh, he was incredible. He was an incredible athlete, and so I've often wondered why that didn't take off. But you know, there's quite a bit on the plate right now. There is a finite pot of fandom that exists out there. There's a finite pot of sponsorship and other kinds of marketing things, and our plate is pretty full.
Before we get to the closing questions, I had to ask you this because in looking at your profile, you list as your first job New York City cab driver.
Correct.
And I just had to ask this. Give us a lesson that you learned from being a cab driver in New York City.
I drove a cab at night while pretending to be a college student in the daytime. Okay. I mean, I drove a 3 to 11 shift in the Bronx, but sometimes in Manhattan. We all had a length of pipe underneath our front seat. I only had to pull it out once, and that was our self defense. Rudolph Bing had 8 seats in the back of the orchestra reserved for free for cab drivers at the Metropolitan Opera in those days. And what he wanted was cab drivers to come in so that they could talk about the current performance when they pick somebody up at Idlewild or LaGuardia. We were, as cab drivers, we were able to see Broadway shows for nothing. It was one of the greatest training grounds for customer service that you have ever seen in your life. If you were aware of what was going on and what you were doing and you engaged people in conversations, you learned how to work tips. It was a wonderful early grounding, and it was a real job. And what was interesting is that from time immemorial, I've had it as my first job on my resume. Bill Graham, the great rock and roll promoter from San Francisco, also drove a cab. And he said, shit,
Good company.
I did too. And he put it on his. So the two of us had cab driver. We were both veterans. He was a veteran of the Korean War and got a Bronze Star. And it was always a little competitive between the two of us. But he was the only other one that led with cab driver on his resume. So that's the story behind it.
I have to say that what Rudolph Bing did and what the Broadway producers did was brilliant marketing.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Well, listen, we have 2 questions that we like to ask all our guests before we let them go. Here goes, Doug.
Where'd your career get started? Where'd you start it?
My grandfather. My grandfather was a half Cuban. I never learned to speak English until I was 6. I'm having this conversation with you in my second language. Okay. And I lived in Cuba through World War II and post World War II. My dad was away, and I formed this father bond with this larger than life man in Havana, Cuba, Mario Gonzalez de Mendoza. Mario Mendoza owned a baseball team. He owned the Almendares baseball team. He had a pitcher whose nickname was Un Poquito el Domingo, a little bit on Sunday. That's all his arm would last. Tommy Lasorda. Okay. And Tommy Lasorda will tell you that he realized that he was in a completely different sport. He was playing baseball, but it was a different sport when he saw his first umpire with a revolver on his hip. Okay. The gamblers, the bookies were allowed in the stands, and they would make prop bets in the stands. Okay. So you could buy a prop bet on the next inning. And there was always a band in the stands. And my grandfather was like the George Steinbrenner. I mean, he was this orchestrator. And what I realized was that at a very early age, that what he was doing was building community, and he was building community through the vocabulary of sports. And from a very early age, my mission statement, my personal business mission statement is always, I want to be that guy. I want to be my grandfather. And I learned how to keep score. I learned how to figure out a batting average at the age of 5 or 6. I knew what an earned run average was early on, and I just got infected with it. And from there, it spread to all sports. But I wanted to be that guy. So if that answers your question,
that is a fantastic answer to our question. Thank you. The last one we have, what one piece of advice would you give for a young person who's looking to break into the sports industry?
Well, sports industry is interesting in that it has a variety of ways, a variety of channels. You know, I taught sports management at NYU for 3 years, and this is all of a sudden has become a major. Well, it's become a major to people who are really interested in, becoming the next David Stern, but it's also become a major for someone who begrudgingly is, oh, I got to go to college, otherwise my father will throw me out of the house. And what can I major in? I'm not gonna major in business like he wants me to, and I don't want to major in something where I really have to work. And the preconceived notion, well, I watch a lot of ESPN, and I do a little betting on the side. I'll do sports management, right? Well, that is sort of a way of getting in, but also a guy who's operating the popcorn popper in the concession stand is also on a career path on the way up and can work himself up right from the bottom. It is a job. As I used to tell ushers in the major facilities and everything, your job is not to go and watch the game. Your job is to sit down there and watch the crowd to see where there's a problem with. We're going to turn you around 180 degrees and you're not going to see a Brunson score, So and it's a job. It's hard work. It ruins your social life because it's all nights and weekends. So you've got no social life if you really want to work at it. David Stern was another good friend, and he was a very funny man and a wonderful, wonderful man. And he said one time he and I were talking over a cup of coffee, and we were just describing how he hires. He says, I go to the best colleges. He says, I go to Harvard, I go to here, there, and everywhere. And I promise someone they'll come and work at the MBA. And he said, and what I do is I don't pay them very much. He said, because I don't have to. He says, they get psychic income out of this job. And he said, but I always make sure that the office is really, really nice because I know they're living 5 in a 2-bedroom in a crappy little apartment. And it's much nicer to be at the office than it is at home. So that they come to the office and I get 12 hours worth of work out of them instead of 10. He says, and then I work them to death for about 10 years. And they realize that they're not going to be, they're really not going anywhere here. And we find a way for them to exit once I've given them a couple of raises, and then I hire a bunch of rookies all over again. He says, and I just rotated. And he says, and you would think they would hate me for it. He says, but they don't. They love me, he said. And they love me because they've got stories for the rest of their life when they go work in some place that's boring and unexciting. And that's the David Stern hiring model. And I would pass that on with a bit of a tongue in my cheek. But it's
well, Doug, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I will say this: young students looking to be the next David Stern would be well served if they wanted to be the next Doug Logan.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
But no, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Delighted. And ask me back. I've enjoyed it.
Okay.
All right.
We appreciate it, Doug. Thank you. I tell you, Tim, we are lucky. I did not know Douglas Logan, but obviously, given his past with MLS, et cetera, I knew of him, and to have a chance to be able to chat with him like that, I think is great. But we move on in the show. It's that time where we take a slight peek ahead, see what we might be interested in following, making any shout outs, making any corrections, or things that we forgot about during the early segment. So, Tim, what do you have your eye on?
I am looking forward to, I should say, 2 U.S.-Canada finals in Olympic hockey.
You're getting a little ahead of yourself, maybe.
No. Shortly before we came, the Canadians the women still have to play the semifinals. Yes, the men beat 𝘓𝘰𝘨 in the semifinals in overtime. Did I just ruin it for you?
No. I thought the women are already set to play in the finals.
Yes, the women are. Yes. The men are also.
Oh, I thought we still had one more round.
You're right. It was only a quarterfinal match, but Canada did make it through. I'm still looking forward to a U.S.-Canada final.
I'm sorry. I want you to look forward to it. I really want you to look forward to it. And that's what I thought. I think everybody's looking forward to it.
Yes, well,
that potential.
And that is the reason for this segment of the show. Both the Canadian and the U.S. men have to get through their semifinal matchups to make it to the finals. But bad news for Canada. Sidney Crosby with the ever popular lower leg injury. Sid the Kid. 38 years old, but they still call him Sid the Kid.
Absolutely. So, why not? When you got a nickname like that.
Yeah, and I'm one of those guys who will actually throw on a spring training game on a weekend afternoon. So I would assume at some point very soon, the Mets and Yankees will start playing spring training games that'll be broadcast here in New York. So I'm looking forward to those as well. How about yourself?
Well, a few quick shout outs. I do want to thank Ed Lynch for helping arrange for the conversation with Mr. Logan. Even though you posted it when the LinkedIn post went up about this one clip, I just don't feel we gave the fact that Piers Sanderson used the word skullduggery a good enough shout out. So I'm giving the word skullduggery and a secondary shout out to Piers. Yeah. Words don't get shout outs very often, but skullduggery, I think, deserved it. Oh, there's going to be so much news coming out. We talked about it earlier, of course, but the MLB and the MLBPA thing, I think, is going to be a fascinating story to follow. Just earlier today, it sounds like the WNBA has rejected the latest WNBA Players Association offer, which felt like it was a move in the right direction, with obviously lowering the revenue percentage and capping the total number, but it was apparently quickly disregarded as unrealistic by the league. So we'll see. It's because that's getting a little scary, even though Adam Silver has said that he's very, very involved now in these negotiations.
I think one of my predictions for this year will not come true because we are getting very close to delaying the start of the season. Now, whether or not they'll play a full season, I guess, remains to be seen. But it's the players are taking a hard line, and Breanna Stewart apparently has an offer to play overseas, which would pay her a lot more than even the best circumstances, I think, in a new collective bargaining agreement. Unrivaled did very well when it was at the Xfinity Mobile Arena, although ratings are down 31% from last year. I'm sure the Players Association knows things we don't, but they seem to feel like they have the upper hand in this negotiation at this point. So we'll see how quickly they come back with a counteroffer.
Yeah, and just as a quick reminder, your prediction was that they wouldn't miss any games. I guess I'm still hopeful that that's the case. Now, with that, I'd say let's go ahead and shut this episode down. Again, a huge thanks to Doug Logan, his perspective, his experience. I think are just unbelievable for us to be able to have those kind of conversations. And so really thankful to him. Tim, of course, thanks to you for another vibrant discussion. Most importantly, thank you, the listener, for spending any amount of time with us each week. It does mean a lot. Be sure to hit those follow, those subscribes on Spotify, on Apple, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. Follow us there on LinkedIn, where we have a good discussion going always. That would be great to hear from you there. And of course, you can follow us or check us out at DP and McGhee for the easiest ways to get links. So that's it. Until next time, I'm DP, he's McGhee, and we'll talk soon.